The South African history of ANC and MKP in exile in Swaziland. The relationship between the African National Congress ANC and Swaziland dates back to the formation of the SANNC in 1912. Swazi Queen Regent Labotsibeni and Crown Prince Sobhuza, who became King Sobhuza II in 1921, financed the Abantu Batho newspaper, a mouthpiece of the SANNC. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Swazis were involved in ICU and ANC activities, particularly in the Transvaal. For instance, Richard W Msimang, who grew up in Swaziland, and Benjamin Nxumalo, a relative of King Sobhuza II, were involved with the South African Native National Congress SANNC, later renamed the ANC. Nxumalo served the Swaziland's representative of the committee that wrote the SANNC, later ANC, Constitution of 1919. The latter formed a Swaziland branch of the ANC in Sobhuza's house in Sophiatown. From early 1900s, there were moves to incorporate Swaziland, Lesotho and Botswana, the three British protectorates, into South Africa. When South Africa imposed apartheid and pulled out of the Commonwealth in 1961, the idea of incorporation was abandoned. Swaziland was briefly granted limited self-rule by the British government before the passing of the Swaziland Independence Act in 1968. After this, on 6 December 1968, Swaziland became an independent country with a constitutional monarchy under King Sobhuza II. The strategic location of Swaziland in relation to South Africa, particularly Natal, and its proximity of Johannesburg and Pretoria, made Swaziland a haven for members of South Africa liberation movements facing violent repression in their country. Significantly, in late 1968, the South African government amended the South African Police Act to allow members of the police force to operate in other countries, and government spies and informants began operating in Botswana, Swaziland, Lesotho, and other countries. The establishment of MK in Swaziland. Tula Simpson, whose work focused on the ANC in Swaziland between 1960 and 1979, notes that South African refugees began arriving in Swaziland in significant numbers in the late 1950s and early 1960s. This development was due to increasing repression in South Africa as the apartheid government began to pass and vigorously enforce repressive legislation. By the mid-1960s, there were a number of ANC and MK activists in Swaziland. By the time Stanley Mabizela arrived in Swaziland in 1965, Joseph Nduli, Ablon Bafana Duma, and Albert Dlomo were already based there. Their task was to develop underground structures of MK cells by recruiting South African refugees in Swaziland. They worked with people inside South Africa, particularly in Natal, to facilitate movement across the two countries for MK assignments. Recruitment was not an easy task as some of the people were not politically active, enjoying a relatively comfortable life as middle-class income earners. British policies sought to incorporate refugees into Swazi society by allowing them to work and settle them. In the period around 1974 and 1975, the ANC embarked on a process to rebuild its structures in Swaziland. In December 1974, Thabo Mbeki and Maxwell Sisulu arrived in Swaziland and were tasked with improving relations with the Swazi monarchy and recruiting refugees for the movement. At a meeting in September 1975, the ANC's Thabo Mbeki and Oliver Tambo met with the King Sobhuza II. Later, John Kadimeng and Martin Ramakadi also spent time in Swaziland to establish an MK military network. Zuma was involved particularly in forging links between Natal and Swaziland, while Kadimeng and Ramakadi worked on links to the Transvaal. Safe houses for MK recruits in transit were also established in various areas of Manzini. When Mozambique gained independence in 1975, the number of the MK cadres passing through Swaziland to Mozambique and then to other countries increased. Swaziland was used as transit point for MK recruits on their way to military training in other African countries and in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. In 1977, the ANC used properties in Ngwane Park in Manzini, Swaziland, to assist with the processing of refugees who wanted to join its ranks. Potential recruits were instructed to write their biographies, state the reason why they wanted to join the ANC, and describe how they ended up in Swaziland. They were taken to Maputo, where they were vetted by the ANC's security apparatus. King Sobhuza II was initially sympathetic to the ANC and generally turned a blind eye to its activities, but as MK began using Swaziland as a transit point for weapons headed for South Africa, there was a change of attitude. A number of raids were conducted by the Swazis, resulting in the confiscation of ANC weapons in transit. Serious problems arose when the groups of the recruits reported to the Swazi police, who in turn informed the South African government. The information provided resulted in the capture of Samson Lukele, a taxi operator who worked for the ANC as a courier shuttling letters, money and recruits between Natal and Swaziland. It was the information supplied by Lukele that led the arrest on 18 March 1976 of Joseph Mthuli, a key figure in the ANC underground in the Durban area. That same month, two other people, Joseph Mpisi Nduli and Cleophas Ndlovu, were kidnapped by South African security forces near the Swaziland borders in a trap set by the latter and Lukele under the pretext of bringing recruits. Furthermore, Dlomo, Mbeki and Zuma were arrested by the Swazi police and detained at Mbabane Maximum Security Prison. They were nearly deported to South Africa, but Stanley Mabizela, Moses Madiba, and Thomas Nkobi managed to secure their release. They were subsequently deported to Mozambique. On 17 February 1982, King Sobhuza II signed a secret agreement with South Africa. The pact bound both parties not to allow any act which involves a threat or use of force against each other's territory and called for action individually or collectively as may be deemed necessary or expedient to eliminate this evil. After the agreement was signed, Stanley Mabizela, the ANC's representative in Swaziland, was forced to leave the country. The death of King Sobhuza II in August 1982 worsened the position of the ANC in Swaziland as the country determined the historical and sentimental connections between the Swazi monarchy and the ANC. The signing of the agreement was taken as a license by Pretoria to deal with ANC activists in Swaziland in any way they wanted. In addition, the Swaziland security establishment mounted a sustained propaganda campaign and arrested many activists, particularly in the 1980s. MK missions launched from Swaziland. Elias Mabizela points out that the gunning down of Detective Sergeant Chapi Mhlubi, a notorious police officer in Soweto, in January 1978 marked the beginning of an escalation of MK attacks inside South Africa. Mhlubi was fingered as one of the black policemen who opened fire on protesting students in the 1976 uprising. In commemoration of Isandlwana, 1979 was declared the Year of the Spear by the ANC, and 1980 was declared the Year of the Charter to mark 25 years of the Freedom Charter. Both years were geared towards building morale for increased ANC activity inside South Africa, with Swaziland playing an important role as a transit point for MK cadres moving in and out of South Africa. Cadres were infiltrated into the Transvaal via the Jeppes Reef and the Oshek border posts. MK used the Golela and Pongola border posts to link up with Natal underground machinery. In 1980, MK carried out a sabotage attack on the Sasol 1 plant. They also attacked the Fort Rika military base in 1981, the Tonga outpost in 1982, and set off bombs in Hectorspurs in 1982 and Pretoria in 1983. All these were launched by MK operatives using Swaziland either as a base or a transit point. Perhaps one of the most important areas from which MK launched operations was Ingwavula in KwaZulu-Natal, a town located less than 5 kilometers from the borders with Swaziland. MK cadres, particularly those based in Natal, used the town as a transit point for guerrillas infiltrating into South Africa from Swaziland and Mozambique. Once in town, they stayed underground in safe houses to avoid detection. Among those who played an important role in using the town was Jameson Nongolozi Mgomezulu, an active ANC and MK member born in Ingwavuma. After joining MK, he was deployed in Swaziland as a base commander and became central in facilitating the movement of cadres between Swaziland and Natal. When threats to his life escalated, he fled to Swaziland. Mgomezulu's sister, Nokuhamba Nyawo, was also an important player. After being recruited to MK, she gathered intelligence and provided supplies to MK operatives moving through the area. Nyawo would receive guerrillas passing through the area and help them skip the border into Swaziland. As Jacob Zuma noted, through her efforts to those of many people from Ingwavuma, Through her efforts and those of many people from Ingwavuma, the MK secured a very strategic base and point of entry in the country, easily accessible from both Mozambique and Swaziland. Weapon consignments destined for MK in Natal regularly passed through the area, especially in the 1980s. Jabulani nobleman Nxumalo was deployed to Swaziland in 1983, disguised as a reporter for the Swaziland Observer under the pseudonym of Jabulani Dlamini. He was detained by the Swazi police and forced to leave the country in 1983, but he returned to the Swaziland in December of the same year under a new pseudonym, this time setting in the Shesolweni district in the south of the country. It was here that Nxumalo crossed the border into KwaZulu-Natal, setting up an MK unit based in Ingwavuma. he served as a commissioner for MK based in rural Natal, a move important for the establishment of Operation Vulindlela. In 1984, Nxumalo was once arrested by the Swazi police and deported to Tanzania. Increased MK military activity in the Ingwavuma area was linked to operation as a move by the ANC to establish military bases in the area and politicize the rural population to create a fertile and safe ground for MK missions. Please stay tuned for the continuation video. And that's it from INJIBS Network. Stay tuned to our celebrity and gossip news.